A lot of Kenyan politicians love mentioning Singapore. They talk about the Singapore model, the Singapore miracle, or turning Nairobi into Singapore. But if we are being honest, truly honest, Kenya cannot imitate Singapore without confronting a painful truth. Our founding father, Jomo Kenyatta, took a selfish path that guaranteed Kenya will never become Singapore, while Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father of Singapore, did everything to make sure his country would rise from nothing and succeed. You see, Kenya and Singapore got independence around the same time. Singapore was a swamp full of slums. Kenya, on the other hand, had land, resources, and a functioning agricultural economy. But the choices the two countries made in the first 10 to 15 years after independence sent them in two completely different directions. Singapore built discipline, fairness, and strong institutions. Kenya built networks of loyalty, land grabs, political protection, and early corruption. To understand why Singapore works today and Kenya struggles, we must first be brutally honest about what Jomo Kenyatta did and what he refused to do. You see, when Kenya became independent, it was not a broken country. It had real advantages compared to Singapore. We had fertile agricultural land, established cash crops. We are talking about tea, coffee, sisal. We also had a railway system, we had Mombasa port, tourism potential, a relatively literate population, and we also had natural resources, though underdeveloped. Most African countries did not even have this foundation. Kenya's real problem was inequality and anger left by colonialism, land theft, forced labor, Mau Mau, torture camps. All of it had created a deeply divided population. Now, the job of the new government was to address these injustices and build a fair future. And this is where Jomo Kenyatta failed, and he failed deliberately and terribly. Jomo did not dismantle the colonial economic system. He inherited it and then protected it. The British had built a country where a small group controlled land, money, and political influence, while the majority lived as cheap laborers with no real ownership. That system was supposed to be broken after independence, but Jomo Kenyatta chose to preserve it by allowing the new African elite to take the place of the departing settlers. Land that was meant for communities uprooted during the emergencies. Families pushed out of the White Highlands, Mau Mau veterans, and villages that had been forced out of their ancestral homes ended up in the hands of ministers, senior civil servants, politically loyal families, well-connected businessmen, and people inside Jomo Kenyatta's own network. Entire settlement schemes were manipulated so powerful individuals could take thousands of acres at the expense of ordinary Kenyans waiting for justice. The colonial economy survived almost untouched. Only the faces at the top changed. This protected Kenyatta's alliances and kept influential groups satisfied, but it also destroyed fairness. It turned Kenya into a country where access to power determined access to land and wealth, not merit, hard work, or the needs of the people who actually had suffered under the colonial rule. You know, a country only becomes strong when institutions are stronger than individuals. Jomo Kenyatta made sure the opposite happened. He turned the civil service into a political reward system. Jobs were given based on tribe, loyalty, political usefulness, and personal networks, not competence at all. And you know, the moment a government chooses loyalty over skill, development in that particular country slows down. Kenya locked itself into this pattern from the first cabinet. Ministers were rewarded for loyalty to the president, not their ability to deliver. And this practice continued for decades, and we feel it even today. Singapore, under their founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, did the exact opposite, but we will deal with that in a few. Now, another bitter truth we must address is that corruption in Kenya did not start with Moi, Kibaki, or Ruto. It started with Kenyatta's government. Not only did corruption happen, it was politically protected. People close to power accumulated land, money, tenders, and opportunities, while the public was told to accept and move on. Familiar? They're still telling you even now, accept and do what? And move on. Anyways, back to our conversation. By the mid-1970s, just over a decade after independence, Kenya was already known internationally as a place where you needed to know someone to get anything done. And this early culture of corruption became part of our national DNA because the politicians allowed it. And once corruption becomes normal in the first generation of a nation, it becomes almost impossible to reverse. Singapore, in contrast, aggressively attacked corruption in its first decade. But hold on, we'll handle this in our Singapore section. Also, Kenya had the perfect condition for industrialization. We talked about the port, land, labor, and foreign support. But Jomo Kenyatta never pushed a serious industrial plan. Why? Because industrialization requires key things: discipline, long-term strategy, merit-based leadership, and disruption of existing power interests. Kenyatta did not want to disrupt anyone powerful. He wanted stability and loyalty. So Kenya remained an agricultural exporter instead of moving into manufacturing. And that single decision is why Singapore became a global industrial hub and Kenya stayed dependent on raw exports like tea and coffee, which we still do even right now. Instead of building a national identity, Jomo Kenyatta leaned into tribe and he used it to secure power, right? We are talking about appointments, contracts, land allocation, state protection, all sorted through ethnic lenses. And the result, Kenya became a country where elections were not about ideas, but tribes, where public offices became it's our turn to eat. You know what I'm talking about? And where national unity was spoken about but never built. Even today, they'll still talk to you about national unity. But how are they building this, right? And this is one of the biggest reasons Kenya keeps repeating the same political cycle. By the time Jomo Kenyatta died in 1978, Kenya had rising corruption, inequality embedded into law and land distribution, institutions that were very weak, and we also had tribal politics because they had been normalized. And also, we can't leave behind industrial potential that was very much wasted, a political elite class that also became very rich than even Kenya itself, and a public conditioned to accept unfairness, right? We still do that. Even today, we still accept unfairness. And these are the foundations that have determined Kenya's path for 60 years. Every president after Jomo Kenyatta inherited a broken structure. And that is the painful truth. Kenya never stood a chance of becoming Singapore because the foundation was designed to protect those in power, not to build a nation. Singapore, with far fewer advantages, made decisions that favored development over comfort, competence over loyalty, and institutions over politicians. Kenya did the opposite, and we are still paying the price for that even today. Singapore's story makes this even clearer. When Singapore became independent, it was not a country anyone expected to survive. It had no land to farm, no minerals to sell, no oil, no natural wealth, and no political safety net. Most people lived in overcrowded slums without proper sanitation. Ethnic riots had recently turned violent. Unemployment was high. The economy was collapsing, and the island was literally being called a poor mosquito-infested swamp. Singapore had nothing, and every expert predicted it would become another failed state in Southeast Asia. But instead of using that hardship as an excuse, their founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, used it as a pressure to build a system that had no room for laziness, corruption, or political games. He understood that Singapore did not have the luxury to behave like a typical post-colonial state. If the leadership made even small mistakes, the country would collapse. That fear forced Lee to govern with discipline, merit, and long-term thinking from day one. And he did not gaze his way through it. He went out and brought in some of the best minds in the world to help him design a survival plan. One of the most important person he brought was a Dutch economist named Albert Winsmuse. And this man had worked with economies that were trying to rebuild after war. And when he arrived in Singapore, he gave Lee a brutally honest assessment. Your country has nothing. If you don't industrialize, you won't survive. Most leaders would have argued, what is this man telling me? I mean, what does he think he knows? But Lee listened, and then he asked Winsmere to stay on as a long-term advisor, which he did for more than 20 years. That partnership shaped Singapore's entire economic direction. Winsmere told Lee to forget about pride and ideology. Singapore did not have the luxury to experiment with political emotions. Are we together? It needed jobs first. So instead of trying to protect small businesses, Lee opened the country to global companies. But he couldn't just invite them. He had to make Singapore a place where investors felt safe, and also they felt respected and confident their money would not be eaten by bureaucracy or bribes. And this is why he focused first on cleaning up the state. Civil servants were picked on merit, trained well, and paid well. If you joined government, you joined to serve the public, not to eat. And if you were caught abusing your position, the punishment was immediate and harsh, because corruption was not treated as a nuisance. No, it was treated as an enemy of the country's survival. And Lee did not just talk tough. He followed through even when it involved people in his own inner circle. In 1986, when his Minister for National Development, Tee Cheang Wan, was investigated for taking bribes, Lee refused to interfere. He refused to protect him. He refused to call off the investigation. And the guy knew he would be prosecuted. And instead of facing trial, he went on and took his own life. Lee later said that the hardest part of leadership was allowing the Lord to touch those closest to power. But that if he made even one exception, Singapore's entire anti-corruption system would collapse. And that moment sent a warning through the entire government. In Singapore, your position could not save you. Not even a minister was untouchable. All right? So you can imagine, just coming back home, if Jomo Kenyatta had put such strong measures, can you imagine where Kenya would be right now? Because one of our greatest enemies as a country is corruption. But we cannot even pinpoint to our own founding father and cite examples on when he fought corruption in this country. No. When that minister unalived himself, and when people knew that he had taken a bribe, his case changed everything inside government. It was the moment everyone in Singapore realized that their founding father was not bluffing. He was not negotiating, and he was not going to protect anyone. From that point on, public office in Singapore carried a different weight. It was no longer a place to secure comfort, build family networks, or quietly profit from opportunities. It became a place where standards were enforced with the same seriousness as national security. And once the fear of corruption was removed, Lee finally had room to build the economy. The one his advisors, people like Winsmere, had envisioned, not an economy driven by political deals or elite favors, but an economy built deliberately around industry, technology, global trade, and long-term competitiveness. And this is where the Economic Development Board, guys, they had an Economic Development Board that became the heart of Singapore's transformation. The EDB was not just another government agency. It was the institution Lee used to design the future. Well, Kenyatta's government focused its early years on consolidating political networks and distributing land to loyalists. Singapore built an agency whose only job was to bring investment, build industries, and create jobs. The EDB was staffed by highly trained professionals, not political appointees, and these were economists, engineers, planners, and negotiators who understood global markets far better than most post-colonial states at the time. The EDB created a step-by-step plan that touched every part of the economy. They mapped out what skills the workforce lacked. They studied which industries were growing globally, and they also identified what Singapore could realistically compete in. Not theories, practicability. They then crafted incentives that made sense, not bribes, not shortcuts, but clear, transparent policies that global companies could trust. And because Lee had already cleaned up the government, firms knew that an approval letter actually meant something. They knew their investment would not be eaten by gatekeepers demanding facilitation fee, right? Well, Kenya's economic direction was shaped by political interests and powerful individuals protecting the status quo. Singapore's direction was shaped by data, global trends, and a willingness to take hard decisions. The EDB sent teams around the world. We are talking about sending them to US, Europe, Japan, to convince companies to open factories in Singapore. But they did not go there begging. They went there with a clear offer: clean government, fast approvals, reliable infrastructure, and a disciplined workforce. It was a level of professionalism foreign investors rarely found in developing countries at the time. This approach is why the EDB had the freedom to do what Kenya never did. They chose winning industries early and invested heavily in them. Even the decision to build Jurong, which many people mocked at the time, shows how far Singapore was willing to go. Jurong was a huge stretch of muddy, mosquito-filled land on the western side of the island, the kind of place people avoided because it flooded easily, had no proper roads, and looked completely useless for any serious development. But the EDB saw what ordinary people could not. This was the only sizable piece of land Singapore could convert into an industrial zone, big enough to attract global companies. So they drained it, leveled it, built the roads, installed power and water systems, and prepared the land long before the first foreign investor arrived. Look at that vision. Look at that vision. It was the EDB's engineering, planning, and execution that turned a swamp into one of Asia's most important industrial estates. What was Jomo Kenyatta doing? What was he doing? Anyways, once Jurong proved that Singapore could turn nothing into economic power, the entire country's confidence changed. Investors who had ignored Singapore before, suddenly saw a government that could plan, deliver, and protect their capital. And this was only the first step. The EDB did not stop at building factories. They started shaping the kind of workforce those factories would need. And this is where Singapore took a direction completely different from Kenya's. Well, Kenya's education system remained tied to theory-heavy colonial models. Singapore tore down everything that did not match its economic goals and rebuilt its schooling around practicality, skills, and economic relevance. English became the working language, so every Singaporean could plug directly into international business. Science and technology, mathematics and science were also strengthened because the new industries required technicians, engineers, and problem solvers, not just clerks or administrators. And the biggest shift happened in how Singapore treated technical education. Polytechnics and technical institutes were not portrayed as options for underperforming students. They were positioned as strong pathways that led straight into good jobs, stable careers, and high-value industries. By the time Singapore factories needed supervisors or mechanics, electronics, assemblers, or precision technicians, the schools were already producing them. And as the skill level rose, productivity did what? It rose. Factories expanded. More investors followed those early successes, and multinationals that had once ignored Singapore suddenly began setting up regional headquarters, research labs, and engineering centers. It became a very positive cycle built on one principle: match skills to jobs, match jobs to industries, and match industries to global demand. But Lee knew even a skilled workforce could not excel if people were going home to slums and overcrowded housing. Social instability would destroy everything they were building. So he turned the Housing and Development Board into one of the most powerful engines of national transformation. Instead of allowing private developers and politically connected elites to buy up land and dictate the future of cities, the way it happened in many post-colonial countries, Singapore pushed through the Land Acquisition Act. And this allowed the government to purchase land at controlled, fair prices to redevelop the island systematically. With that land, they built entire towns. We are not just talking about apartment blocks, no. They built clinics, schools, markets, bus routes, and community centers, creating neighborhoods that were planned, organized, and safe. And by allowing workers to use their Central Provident Fund savings to buy these homes, Lee turned ordinary Singaporeans into homeowners. That single decision wiped out slums, reduced inequality, stabilized families, and gave citizens a direct stake in the country's success. A nation of renters became a nation of owners, and that created a type of social stability Kenya never achieved. I see we are trying it right now, but how are we doing it? How is Kenya doing it? And how many years later are we trying this? At the same time, anyways, let's go back to Singapore. Lee had to fix a problem that was destroying many developing countries. Workers and employers were constantly fighting. Before independence, unions in Singapore went on strike all the time. A factory could shut down in the middle of the day without warning. Investors definitely hated that. They believed Southeast Asia was too chaotic to put serious money into. Lee changed that completely. Instead of allowing unions to fight companies on their own, he brought workers, employers, and the government to the same table. They agreed on clear rules, how wages would grow, when they could negotiate, and what was fair. And those rules were based on productivity, not emotions. When everyone understood the system, strikes disappeared. Workers knew what to expect, employers felt safe to invest, and factories ran without sudden shutdowns. And because the environment was stable, Singapore became one of the best places in Asia for companies to operate. Once Lee sorted out the constant strikes and made labor stable, he finally had the freedom to build the real engine of Singapore's economy. And he did not waste that chance. He put money straight into the places that would grow the country, starting with the port. At that time, many developing countries did not even realize how important a fast organized port was, but Lee did. He upgraded the entire thing, introduced modern container systems, built proper docking terminals, pushed out corrupt officials, and made sure ships could come in, unload, reload, and leave quickly. No delays, no games, no hidden costs, and that speed became Singapore's secret weapon. Shipping companies did not choose Singapore because it was cheap. They chose it because it was efficient. It respected their time. And in business, what do we say? Time is money. From there, Lee made another big decision. Instead of trying to patch up Singapore's old airport, he decided to build a completely new one at Changi. And he did not build it for prestige or show off. He built it as a tool to grow the economy. Changi had long runways for bigger planes, proper cargo areas for goods, and systems designed to move everything quickly and cleanly. That airport changed Singapore's position in the world. Airlines that were unsure about Southeast Asia suddenly made Singapore their main base because they knew their planes would not get stuck waiting for slow procedures or messy organization. They would land, refuel, load, and take off without delays. Everything ran on strict efficiency, and that reliability made Singapore the region's aviation hub. And because Singapore had no natural resources, listen to these guys, they had no natural resources. Lee had to think differently. He decided to do something most people thought made no sense: turn Singapore into a major oil refining country, even though it did not have a single drop of oil of its own. What he understood was very simple. Location can be a resource too. Ships carrying oil passed through Singapore every single day. So the government invited big petroleum companies to build refineries and chemical plants on the western side of the island. Later, all these facilities were linked together on what became Jurong Island with pipelines, storage tanks, and deep water ports designed to handle massive ships. Within a few years, Singapore became one of the biggest oil refining centers in the world, not because it had oil, but because it made the whole system fast, reliable, and easy for global companies to operate in. Telecommunications followed the same logic. Lee understood that trade is not just about moving goods from one place to another. It's also about moving information quickly and accurately. So, Singapore invested early in modern communication systems that connected the port, the airport, customs offices, shipping agents, banks, and insurance companies. Instead of waiting days for paperwork to move from one office to another, everything was linked through national IT systems. This meant goods could be cleared in hours instead of days, and companies could track their cargo without confusion or delays. While other countries were still drowning in paperwork, Singapore created a smooth, reliable information pipeline that kept businesses moving. And this made the country even more attractive to companies that needed speed and certainty. What made all this work was how Singapore used the money it earned. Instead of letting profits disappear into politics or private pockets, the government pushed that money straight back into strengthening the economy. When the port made money, it used those profits to build new terminals and buy better equipment. When the airport made money, it expanded runways and added new facilities before congestion became a problem. When the oil and chemical industries grew, the surrounding infrastructure grew with them. Singapore kept moving before things broke down, and that constant reinvestment meant the country always stayed one step ahead, and businesses knew they could rely on Singapore year after year. I mean, it's amazing. You get money, push it back to the economy. You get money, pump it back. You get money, invest, reinvest. Like, God, you know, instead of you getting the audacity to tell your citizens how 2 billion gets lost in every single day. These are stories you would never hear even in Singapore. And underneath all this, there was one more thing that separated Singapore from countries like Kenya. And this is financial discipline. While many nations took on heavy loans, Singapore avoided debt traps by saving aggressively through the CPF and later managing national reserves professionally through sovereign investment companies, talking about companies like Temasek and GIC. And this meant Singapore could build infrastructure without depending on donors, without begging lenders, and without being forced into IMF conditions. Every major project was paid for with discipline, not political theatrics. And by the 1980s, we are still in the 1980s. We are still talking about 1980s. By then, all these elements, clean government, competent institutions, skilled workers, stable labor, disciplined finances, and world-class infrastructure had fused into a system that produced continuous growth. Singapore did not rise because it was lucky. It did not rise because it was rich. It rose because it built a model where every part supported the next and none of it depended on political alliances or tribal arithmetic. And when you look at that entire journey, you see the contrast clearly. Singapore had none of the natural advantages Kenya had. They had no land, no minerals, no fertile soil. But it had something Kenya lost very early. A leadership that chose development over comfort. A leadership that chose merit over loyalty. And long-term vision over political convenience. And because the leadership moved that way, the people followed. Singapore's work ethic was shaped by a system that rewarded competence. If you worked hard, you moved up. If you delivered results, you were trusted with more responsibility. Public servants were expected to show up on time, solve problems quickly, and treat their offices as national duty, not personal opportunity. It's not like here, where you walk into a parastatal or government office and the workers are looking at you as if they are doing you a favor. It's because there's no discipline, there's no work ethic. People don't even understand who they are serving. They are there to move up, get whatever they can, and go out, And Kenyans, we actually did not even have that culture. I don't know if we have it right now. But everything in Singapore was designed to serve its people. And if you're a civil servant, you are expected to also go and serve your people. And that culture trickled down to the entire society. Factories ran on time. Businesses respected schedules, and efficiency became a habit, not a slogan. Kenya, on the other hand, went the opposite direction. When jobs went to friends, not performers, people learned to chase connections instead of sharpening their skills. When you have politicians here allowing shortcuts and favors, the public will adapt the same behavior. When lateness, inefficiency, and excuses were tolerated at the top, they became normal everywhere else. So, Singapore's discipline created momentum, Kenya's politics created delays. Singapore grew because its people understood that progress depended on effort and consistency. Kenya stagnated because the system taught people that effort alone was not enough. You needed access and you needed to know someone somewhere. And that single message changed the country's entire direction. Because once people realized that connections matter more than competence, they stopped believing in fair competition. They stop trusting institutions. They stop dreaming big. They start playing safe, waiting for favors or fighting for proximity to power instead of building actual skill. Kenya did not just lose time. We lost momentum, ambition, and the work ethic that nations need to rise. And that's a painful truth. That's a painful truth. And the most painful part also is this. Kenya had everything it needed to win. It had land, fertile soil, a working port, a functioning railway, cash crops already feeding the economy, tourism that could have grown into a global brand, and a population that was so hungry for progress after independence. If Jomo Kenyatta had chosen discipline over comfort, competence over loyalty, and nation building over political deals, Kenya would have taken a completely different path. With our resources and geography, Nairobi could easily have become the Singapore of Africa, a clean, organized, reliable city that anchors regional trade and industry. Mombasa could have become a world-class shipping hub the way Singapore did. Our civil service could have been one of Africa's best. Our workforce could have been trained with the same urgency and focus Singapore used. Kenya had the raw material to rise. What it lacked was the leadership mindset that Singapore had. And we have to normalize calling people like Jomo Kenyatta out, calling them the founding fathers of a nation, without telling our generations the kind of harm this man caused this nation. That's pretense. And we will not do it here because Jomo Kenyatta messed this country to the core. And what we are witnessing right now are the fruits of his decisions. His selfishness, his greed, and his inability to industrialize this country. And that is where the contrast becomes undeniable. When you look at how Singapore's founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, handled power, unlike many African leaders of his time, he did not cling also to the seat like a life guarantee. He did not fight his own ministers. He did not threaten instability when his time came. He did not even try to bend institutions to protect his legacy. After building the foundations of modern Singapore, he stepped down smoothly. Smoothly. Are we together? Smoothly. Here in Africa, you still have presidents who want to extend their term limit. They want to change the constitution, butcher it, so that they can rule for another term. But look at this man. Look at this man. Came to power, did what he had to do, and when time came for him to step down, he stepped down smoothly. In 1990, he did that, and he allowed a new generation to take over.
I, Goh Chok Tong, having been appointed to the office of Prime Minister,
without shaking the country. There was no constitutional amendments, no staged crisis, no last-minute maneuvers, just a leader handing over power because the country mattered more than his ego. And also stepping down for this man did not mean abandoning the mission. He stayed on as a mentor, not a shadow ruler, not a puppet master, not a retired politician waiting to be begged for advice. He guided when necessary, cautioned people when it was needed, and reminded Singapore's new leaders that discipline and good governance were non-negotiable. He respected the new Prime Minister, supported continuity, and used his experience to strengthen institutions, not undermine them. And he kept doing that until the end of his life. God, I was watching this man's story, how Singaporeans would come out to celebrate this man's birthday, how he created botanical gardens, how he would go to school and hold debates with young people. He would actually have conversations with young people. And I remember an instance where when he won an election but with 70% votes, he was really concerned about the 30%. And he held conversations with people to understand why did 30% of the people not feel the need to vote for me. And people expressed their concerns, and this man listened. This man listened. This man was there holding debates with young people. I'm not even lying, guys. You can check that out. It was so beautiful to witness, you know? And even when international media would try to influence his own country, when they would try to criticize him for not having a strong opposition, let me actually let you guys watch this because this is very important. These are some of the answers that he would give, you know. He was so concerned about the people that he did not care what the entire world thought. All he cared about is, were his people okay? Watch this with me.
But do you ever feel, Prime Minister, it's often been said in the West that a good democracy, a good democratic society is one in which you not only have a good government, but you have a good opposition to match that government. Do you not ever feel the lack of that?
I often wonder whether the foreign journalists or the casual visitor like you has fathomed or can fathom the mind of an Oriental. What's inside is completely different. Is this a good government that I can trust to look after me and my family and will see that my children are educated and will have a job better than mine and have a home better than mine? Is it fair, or is it unfair, unjust, favoring its relatives, its friends, looting the public purse for its relatives, for itself, so that ministers live in luxury whilst the masses live in squalor? I mean, those are the crucial issues, because those are the issues that have toppled governments in the third world.
Yeah, that's him. So you see the kind of leader that this person, these are the people who should be called leaders. What we had here were greedy politicians, not leaders. I mean, calling Jomo Kenyatta a leader. Come on, guys. Huh? You can see what this man, and we can say, Lynn, you cannot compare. Why not compare? Why not compare? Singapore was badly off than Kenya. But you can see the decisions they took or the decisions they made. They cared about the generation to come. Actually, I'm going to let you listen to more snippets before we even come back of this man. So you get to see how he used to reason, right?
I am calculating not in terms of the next election. I am calculating in terms of the next generation, in terms of the next 100 years, in terms of eternity. And believe you me, the next 1,000 years, we will be here. I won't be here, but people like me and like my friends here tonight will be here. Recognizable, identifiable. The more effective and self-reliant we become, the more desirable and reliable a partner we will make. And what we lack in numbers, we will make up for in quality, in the standards of discipline, training, motivation and dedication, and leadership.
We are better fed, better dressed, and better housed. Living in high-rise new towns, working in high-rise offices and factories, traveling in crowded buses and lifts, our lives will be unbearable if we are all selfish and inconsiderate.
So now, guys, imagine if Kenya had that. Imagine if our founding father had built a system that could survive him. A system that did not collapse the moment he left the scene. Jomo died in power, yes, but the real problem is that he left behind a state built around himself instead of institutions. There was no structured handover plan, no protected civil service, no strong rules that could outlive the leader, and no national culture of orderly transitions. Everything depended on personal networks, not national systems. So, when he died, Kenya did not inherit a stable machine. It inherited uncertainty, power struggles, and institutions that were too weak to guide the country on their own. And that is where the contrast with Singapore becomes so sharp. Their founding father did not just lead well, he built institutions that could function without him. He created a political culture where leaders were expected to step down, where performance mattered more than loyalty, and where the next generation was trained long before the old one left. When he eventually stepped aside, Singapore did not panic. It did not split. It did not fall into factional battles. It moved smoothly because the system was stronger than the man. If Kenya had been built that way, the story today would be very different. Kenya would not be restarting the same conversations every single decade or every single election cycle. It would not be trapped in cycles of corruption, tribal politics, and short-term survival strategies. It would have become a stable, disciplined, globally respected African powerhouse because the potential was always there. What Singapore created, Kenya could have created faster and bigger. And the difference was not land, resources, or the population. The difference was the foundation the first leader chose to build. And whether that foundation was meant to serve a nation or serve a network, and we both know it served a network. Kenya did not fail because it lacked resources or people with talent. It failed because the starting point was built on loyalty, land deals, and political comfort, instead of strong institutions and clear rules. That early foundation shaped how governments behave, how public offices work, how citizens think about opportunity, and how the country responds to problems. When a system is designed to protect power instead of progress, the country moves, but it doesn't move far. And this is the part many Kenyans need to hear. Singapore did not become Singapore because of magic. It became Singapore because its first leader chose discipline when it was inconvenient. He also chose competence when it was unpopular, and long-term planning when his people were still living in slums. Kenya chose the opposite path, and that choice has followed us for 6 decades, 60 years later. And I want us to continue with the conversation around Singapore, because we cannot have people who keep talking to us about Singapore without honoring the steps that Singapore took to get to where it is right now. And tomorrow, I will want us to talk about President Ruto's obsession with Singapore. Why he keeps citing this place, what he thinks he's trying to emulate, and the uncomfortable truth about whether Kenya is actually prepared to do what Singapore did, or whether this is just another political slogan that collapses the moment you test it. I want us to have that conversation together. Today, we've just concentrated on the founding fathers because it was very important for us to understand why our foundation was wrong from the word go. And we also have to stop this obsession with citing countries that did the work. Well, we did not. We have to be okay with the mistakes we made. We have to call out the people who participated in the downfall of the structures and the systems of this country. And then now from there, we can have a clean start. Because if Ruto is going to keep talking about Singapore, he needs to tell us, how has he addressed corruption? How is he addressing land injustices? How is he addressing our infrastructure? You see what Singapore did? They looked at an airport and decided, this one, it's serving its purpose. Why do we have to keep talking about renovating JK? Why can't we build another bigger, stronger airport? Ruto also needs to tell us, how is he pumping money back into the economy? Right now, we are talking about affordable housing, a model that Singapore used, I don't know, forever ago. And they had clear ways on how they went around it. And people saw results. Yeah, I know in the comment section, some people will come with, oh, but Lee was not a saint. No, no one is a saint. No one is a saint. Of course, he had his own weaknesses here and there. But at the end of the day, we have to agree. Every time we cite Singapore, every time we are talking about Singapore, it's because now we admire where Singapore is right now. But the uncomfortable truth we don't want to have as a nation is, are we ready to do what Singapore did to get there? That's a conversation of another day. And I completely, honestly, I want to believe when people say Jomo Kenyatta failed this nation, it's not because they hate Jomo Kenyatta, but it's because the results speak for themselves. It's because the results speak for themselves. A founding father is not just a name. A founding father is someone who can be able to move their nation from one step to the next. And all Jomo Kenyatta did was move our country's resources to his own home. And his own cronies and his own mafia. You know? That is the uncomfortable conversation that we need to have as Kenyans. We want to be Singapore, but are we prepared to do what Singapore did? Are these politicians really prepared to do that? That is the conversation we are going to have tomorrow, as I bring you a very unbiased episode on Ruto's plan towards making Kenya a first world country in 2055. Let us see the things he wants to put in place and analyze and see, are these just theories? Or can we really become a first world country by 2055? That is the conversation we are going to have tomorrow. So come back tomorrow and watch that as well. In the meantime, we are heading towards the end of the year. And I just want to say it's been an amazing time here at LNN. Our mindset has shifted and so many things have changed. But you guys are still the real MVPs. You tune in every single time to see what we have. And I can't thank you enough for the growth on our subscribers. We are at 1.4 million subscribers. 1.44 actually. Thank you so much. There's nothing we give you or there's no way we bribe you, but you just support us because maybe what we do resonates with you. And I just want to say thank you for supporting independent journalism. And I want to encourage every creative, every person that is out there. Please participate in educating our nation. We will clap at a person that says, oh, we are going to be the next Singapore. But we need to educate the masses on what Singapore did to get there. And we need to call out these people we were told were our founding fathers. No. We are going to rewrite history and we are going to give you the truth and nothing but the truth. Because just like you, I'm so tired. I'm just so, I'm so exhausted of seeing how politicians play with our minds. How they just use slogans after slogans after slogans, but there's little to no development on the ground. How the ones who know someone are quickly even elected to parliament. I know Kenya is ni nchi ya kitu kidogo. Kenya ni nchi ya who do you know. But guys, we also have to hold ourselves accountable. How is our work ethic? Are we disciplined enough? Do we honor the spaces that we are serving? Because we really have to have these conversations. Otherwise, there is no way we are moving forward. Let no one fool you that they are going to make Kenya a first world country by 2055 if we do not change a lot on the ground. Are we together? So, I felt the need to first have a conversation on the founding fathers so that you can see how people can actually get independence at the same time, but make choices that are going to influence their citizens forever. Right now, Singaporeans look back and see a strong founding father. Kenyans will look back and see a greedy, selfish founding father, and that's a fact. All right? So thank you for walking this journey with us. Even as the year comes to an end, I just want to appreciate you. And I hope we see each other tomorrow. Continue supporting our work, continue contributing towards independent journalism. I see your M-Pesa messages. I appreciate that. And also remember, you can channel your support on our paybill number, our PayPal account, or just subscribe. Like, share, comment, and also make sure that you forward a link to this episode to people who you think would appreciate it. And I also want to say thank you to the team that gets to help in researching, filming, and putting this work together takes a lot to be able to bring you these episodes. So thank you so much, Team LNN. And if there's anything you would want to say on the comment section and you feel, Lynn, I don't want to say it here, there's an email, info@lnn.digital. And you can also use the same email to share tips with us or even suggestions of conversations that you would love to see on the platform. So I'm going to see you guys tomorrow. Remember to tune in, all right? My name is Lynn Ngugi. Bye-bye.